You're listening to the Savoir-Faire Audio Experience.
Are you ready? The bass be louder.
The Savoir-Faire Experience is your guide to everything that has to do with lifestyle. From dating, rides, style, and entertainment. All brought to you by the editor of Savoir-Faire magazine, Robert White. Anything goes on this audio experience. So, let's go.
It's still the best.
All right, guys, welcome to the Savoir-Faire Audio Experience. Thank you guys for listening, subscribing. We really appreciate you. Make sure you're checking out savfair.com to read the articles and learn about different events and things we have happening right now. One of the big things we just launched for February 17 was the Savoir-Faire Model Search. So if you are interested in participating in that, make sure you go check it out, which is kind of a cool thing. Again, we love to interview very unique, cool people, and today is really going to be no exception to the rule. I'm real excited to kind of talk to this guy. He is an author for sure, and he's created multiple books that I've been able to check out and read a little bit. Joe Hawke, how are you doing, sir, Joe?
I'm blessed to be alive. How are you, Robert?
Same. It's an exciting Monday morning for sure. I'm still trying to get motivated. So the weather has been beating us up in New York, and I'm trying to recover a little bit from the cold weather, but I think this week's going to be chilly, and then maybe it will break. I'm just still waiting for spring. So
I think we all are at this point.
yeah, I think so too. Well, Joe, I'm excited to talk with you a little bit today and learn more about your book and what kind of things you kind of have happening there. One of the big things we like to do with the podcast is just to kind of build the timeline and learn a little bit more about who you are. So if you wouldn't mind, kind of take us back a little bit and give us some of your background, business background, education, where you grew up. All those things are important to us.
Okay. So I basically grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, and was a product of 12 years of Delaware public schools, and then went to college outside of Philadelphia at Haverford College, where I studied philosophy. I determined towards the end of my career at Haverford that my poverty was not going to save the world, so I decided to get a job, and as we used to say, get a real job, which ended up entering me into a commercial credit training program at a bank in Philadelphia. And after a few years there, I ended up making a couple of moves that took me to a boutique venture capital firm in Radnor, Pennsylvania. And then eventually I ended up in the post 9/11 wake doing my first helicopter investment. And I would say for the past now 23 years, hard to believe, the majority of my career has been focused on investing in the helicopter industry. So that's, I would say in a nutshell, my business background. I was always interested in writing and thought I might pursue that as part of a career in academia when I thought I was going to become a philosophy professor. But after a probably 30 plus year hiatus, I ended up coming back to it in my early to mid 50s and published my first book last year called American Justice on Amazon. And I have another book that imminently should be getting published by Pegasus in the UK, which is a collection of short stories called On Earth as It Is in Heaven. So
yeah, I've seen the information about both books, which is great. I definitely want to dive into some of those because that's kind of the big piece here is that you are an author. But I'm curious about some of that investment stuff that you just mentioned. So investing in helicopters, right? You said so. You're directly investing in technology or the companies, or how does that work?
Yeah, so historically, it's really been focused mostly on companies that operate either by flying helicopters or that fix helicopters, so maintenance, repair, and overhaul type businesses, and in some cases, a combination of the two. The very first investment we did at my prior partnership was outside of Philadelphia and was called Keystone Helicopter Corporation, and it was very diversified. It was second generation 50-year-old business at the time that we had stewardship of it. And ultimately, it got acquired by Sikorsky, based in Connecticut, when at the time it was still owned by United Technologies. It's now owned by Lockheed Martin. I also invested, or led the investment, I should say, in a company called Air-Evac Life Team that was a pure play paramedical operation based in West Plains, Missouri. And we ended up creating kind of a holding company and acquiring other businesses that also did aeromedical transportation. Eventually, that became known as Aeromedical Group Holdings. And my partners ended up selling that business in 2010 to Bain and Company, Bain Capital, and Bain 5 years later sold it to KKR, who owns it now.
Okay.
So those are some of my claims to fame. And
Yeah, that's very cool though. So I mean, do you kind of feel like some of that stuff gave you some of the financial freedom that you needed to be able to write? Because that's one of the things that I've noticed about wanting to sit down and write a book is that I can't, because I need to work a 9 to 5. I need to continue to work every day. And if I take time away to write a book, you know, like I was like, well, if I had the money in the bank, then maybe I could take a month off to write something. Like, how do you make that part of it work for you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's definitely had, a beneficial impact on balance. Along the way, I decided to become an entrepreneur and sort of went out on my own, which was anything but a straight path to prosperity, and probably ended up consuming more resources than it produced. But I've got sort of a profile in the industry as a deal guy, and so I'm working on other deals, which gives me a fair amount of flexibility. So I'm far from retired from a business career, but I have enough flexibility in my schedule that on a somewhat sporadic basis, I'm able to spend a fair amount of time focused on my writing.
Okay, cool. No, I appreciate you giving me information about that too, because obviously I'm the entrepreneur grind myself and trying to get through some books and write. And so, yeah, connecting with people like you where I can get a little bit of tidbits of information. I'm sure my audience appreciates that stuff too. So, yeah, it's very unique to kind of see how that develops with that free time to be able to kind of grind and write. So talk to me about writing in general. I mean, what's the process of being able to kind of just get in the mood and sit down? Is there something that happens in real life, or are you kind of pulling ideas from someplace before you decide that you're going to sit down and actually write about a topic? I hear from songwriters quite often that write music that they get little ideas, they write stuff down, there's little tidbits of information, and then later they come back and put it all collectively together to make a song. Is writing a book a similar process to that?
I think so, in certain respects. I mean, it turns out that I end up just in my normal activities, whether it's business or otherwise, having a fair amount of time in the car, which gives me time to think, and ideas will occur to me. Sometimes things from the past, sometimes ideas that I think could be incorporated in terms of plot in a current work that I'm actively pursuing. So I try to, obviously, if you're in your car, you don't have a laptop with you, you can't exactly start writing, but I do try to jot down notes using just an app in my phone to give me something to jog my memory, so that when I'm literally back at the keyboard, so to speak, composing, I've got those reminders. And I would say a lot of the specific writing that I've done recently, both what I'm working on now as well as what I've been published or have coming out soon, have tended to be things that are drawing a lot on my personal experience. And obviously they're fictionalized, and you want to be able to make certain things, maybe more interesting to the reader than the real life experience was. But I would say those combination of techniques end up giving me the inspiration. It's also helpful to read, I find. I literally just finished reading The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, which is kind of, you could say, an archetype in terms of plot formulation. And so I've done a fair amount of concurrent reading while I'm writing to try to inspire me. But it is definitely not easy to get sort of in the mood to write always. And, I can have an entire month pass before I get back to a work that I'm actively pursuing. And a lot of times, these other sources of inspiration finally kind of get me to a point where I can focus and then everything starts to flow.
Yeah, understandable. Very cool. Well, I saw the book American Justice, and so I was definitely curious about asking you about that one, where the concept comes from, what that book is about, and what kind of like led to you writing it, and why did you dive down that kind of rabbit hole with that topic?
Sure. So, to be honest, that particular, I would call it a novella. It's about, I want to say, 15,000 words. So, it's kind of short for a novel, but it's originally I wrote a short story, which is the first chapter, called In My Defense. And it's based on a character who is kind of having a midlife crisis, leaving a beach vacation, has a sort of ordeal on the way home, gets into a spat with his significant other. He's a divorcee, so is she. They have adult children, and there's various sources of frustration. But ultimately, he's trying to save his company, goes to New York to try to raise the money to do that. And in the course of his travails in New York, at the end of a day of meetings, he's a native Texan who always has his firearm on him, and he decides to intervene in a robbery that's in process, and inadvertently ends up committing manslaughter, I guess, kills the person that he's trying to, arrest. So, and kind of that ending piece of it, which is really just all in the first chapter, which gives rise to the rest of what happens throughout the novella, was, I would say, more than anything inspired by just current events and the kinds of things that were being reported in the news in terms of, drugstore robberies that weren't being, where the people committing the crimes weren't being apprehended and stuff like that. And it sort of leads into a little bit of a, I guess, observation of the political environment in 2024 in particular. And one of the reasons I self-published it was because it makes a prediction about the outcome of the 2024 presidential election. And so I wanted to not get through a process where that would have already concluded before the work had been published. So that's why I ended up deciding to self-publish it on Amazon.
I see. Yeah, very cool. I mean, I like the topic for sure. It obviously hits home a little bit. Those are things that were in the news pretty heavy when, like you said, they were pretty heavy in the news stories, and so it makes sense that a book like that would be a good hit. But you've also moved on to do other projects, and so I'm really curious about this new book. This is the one that I was able to kind of get a brief on, called On Earth as It Is in Heaven. I was looking for this one. It's not posted on Amazon quite yet, or it's coming soon?
Yeah, it has not yet been published. The
Okay.
publisher of that book is actually Pegasus out of the UK, and they're a stocking distributor. So it will be available not only online through Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and folks like that, but also, physically in bookstores.
Okay, good. So let's talk about this one. This one, when I read the brief, was very interesting to me. So I'll let you kind of describe it, and then we'll do a deep dive on this book. I'm really curious about where the storyline came for this one.
Yeah, so this actually, you could say in some respects, has been decades in the making. I had written a number of short stories when I was in my very late teens and early 20s, but somehow I managed through successive moves and a divorce and all other sorts of life's, events over the next 30 plus years not to lose. And so some of these were stories about, they're sort of autobiographical about my childhood. Some of them were imagined about kind of things that my parents had to confront. I'm the child of immigrants. My mother's Canadian. My father's from Pakistan, and they met in Ottawa, Canada. So I decided to write about those other things that I hadn't yet addressed as I came back to and rediscovered some of these pieces. And ultimately, it's a collection of 12 short stories that sort of tie together. Characters recur across the arc of the storyline, and it's a kind of chronological presentation, starting with, kind of my arrival to my time visiting my uncle in Pakistan when I'm now in my early 50s.
I see.
So that's
So the characters
in a
in
nutshell what it's about.
the characters in that book are Mary and Muhammad. So this book is 100% based on the story of your parents.
I would say it's largely based on that. Again, it's fictionalized, and there are intervening stories or episodes that focus on some of my, let's say, coming of age experiences growing up, both as a young child and as let's say an adolescent, and then eventually in early adulthood as a young or expecting parent. So, to be sure, there's fictionalization going on, but I would say in many respects it is predicated on an autobiographical, set of experiences.
Yeah. So what kind of caught my attention was the headline of the book in the beginning. So it says, "When Mary, a spirited Irish Catholic, falls for Muhammad, a devoted Pakistani PhD student." Like that line alone says, okay, this is going to be a battle of religious backgrounds and communal backgrounds, and all these things are going to start like colliding. So is that what the book kind of guides you through or walks you through?
Yeah, very much so.
Okay.
It's very much of a kind of an account of what it's like to grow up in the States, which, I'm decidedly American. This is where I was born and bred, but I have these sort of other, let's say, heritage or that are part of my background, and they definitely shape both who I am and kind of how I've understood the world as a consequence.
I see. So I mean, you're basically the child from this story background. So I mean, you lived this a little bit. What were some of the things that kind of intrigued you about your parents' story to be able to start using them as an at least a I guess inspiration for the book, right? I mean, if it's not directly about their life, but you must have heard stories. You were talking to other family members, and that's what kind of got you intrigued.
Yeah, I would say both. Well, my father passed away in '95, so most of the stories that or the information that I got, at least as it relates to things that I didn't have, a conscious experience of, were definitely informed by information I got from my mother in particular. Um, the other, let's say, fill in the blank elements that I kind of imagined on my own, largely were informed by experiences as an adult traveling to meet my father's siblings who are still living. And I decided that that was something that was important to me,
Mm-hmm.
because he was the only one to leave the subcontinent and come to North America from his family. So I have, aunts and uncle, many first cousins, and as my own children, since they never got to know my father, got to be an age where I was able to take them on that kind of a trip. It became important to me to do that. And then, of course, when you're there, you end up hearing, different sorts of stories about, in my case, my father. So, or in my case of my son's, their grandfather. So that was, some of these stories, to be honest, I actually, even before the whole collection or the idea of publishing it had come together, I would start writing on, what is a long journey home, that gives you plenty of time in the sky to write if you're inclined to do so.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, talking about the book, I want people to go out and check out the book when it comes. On Earth as It Is in Heaven. Where did this title come from? What kind of brought that on a little bit?
So that's straight out of the Lord's Prayer.
Uh huh.
And as somebody whose, ultimate religious identification is as Christian, I'm actually an Episcopalian now, but my early religious education from the time I was like 5 years old till I was 10 was in Islam. And so I have, a definite perspective on it. I'm probably more informed than most Christians are about Islam. But I also ultimately got baptized and became Catholic when I was 12 years old, and then went through the whole catechism process as I was in middle and high school, and was very active with my church. So the Lord's Prayer is something that, is meaningful to me. And I sort of felt like that particular line sort of captures some of what went on or, goes on within the book, in particular as it relates to the interaction between my parents.
Very cool. Without giving too much away, I want a little sneak peek here, if you can. So, is there a story within the book that is more realistic of what you learned about your parents and their situation and relationship that you can share?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is something I was alive for. In fact, I was in my early 20s. My parents themselves got divorced when I was, I guess, in high school. They got separated when I was like 15. They got divorced when I was 17 or just about to turn 18. And my father remarried. And interestingly enough, he remarried a Pakistani woman who, is probably one of the most despicable people that I've encountered on the planet. When my father got ill, she would go to Pakistan regularly to see her family, which is in a different part of the country than his family. So when he got ill, she basically took him to Pakistan and left him there for over a year with one of his sisters. And in one of the stories, my father has been brought back. I am telling my mother that, just matter of factly, that if he goes back to Pakistan, which was the understanding of his wife's intent, that we would, probably never see him again, because it was clear that he was, not doing well and probably not going to live for that much longer. And my mother, again, divorced from my father at this point, basically said, if you bring him to me, I will take care of him. And so we did that, and she did that the last 16 months of his life.
Wow. That's really cool to hear, actually. I mean, yeah, I'm trying to put myself in your mother's shoes, and I'm like, would I do that? Like, that's not something that people really have the big heart for, especially in an ex relationship. But I completely understand the situation that you guys had going on there, like the idea that his last moments needed to be here, right? Like where you guys could have access to him, communicate with him, be with him. So, yeah, that's really cool, man. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's awesome. Well, Joe, I'm glad we had a chance to really kind of connect and talk a little bit about your two books. Obviously, the one book is out and available on Amazon now. That one is called American Justice. People need to go check that one out. But this new book, On Earth as It Is in Heaven, is coming out soon. Do you have a release date for that quite yet?
Not quite yet.
Okay.
We're pressing the publisher to try to get that information. It is in kind of the being finalized mode.
Okay.
And I just got a message from them this morning saying that they have everything they need. So we just need to sit tight. But I'm hoping it'll be out.
Yeah. People can find
by the end of the quarter or soon thereafter.
Okay. Yeah. People can find your Amazon profile with American Justice by your name. That's how I found you. So you go on Amazon, look for Joseph Hawke, and then you'll be able to find American Justice. And eventually On Earth as It Is in Heaven will be published there too. And hopefully people will go out and check it out. So again, Joe, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate connecting and talking a little bit about the book and a little bit of like the behind the scenes of how you're, finding the time to write and also think about some of the creative stuff you're coming up with, which is very cool. So thank you.
Thank you, Robert. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the show. Please take a minute to head over to www.savfair.com and subscribe to our publication.